but Ozzie's back. Love that he is back. You know, Ozzie, I was just thinking, you know, you've been going, you go away for a few months, explore the world, got lots of reports for us, and I'll get to that in a second. But I was just thinking, 2 weeks from today, you're back at the Land Rush Conference. I mean, you don't take a break, do you? Both feet. Yeah, you're there with both feet. 2 weeks Saturday.
Well, you know, people say after 3 months you ought to do some work. Anyways, we have our 26th annual forecasting seminar. It's really amazing. 12 speakers, 500 attendees. We'll be at the Pinnacle Harbourfront Hotel. You can look us up at landrushcanada.com for tickets. But, you know, Mike, we've had an amazing track record. If you've done nothing else but just attend for 25 years and listen to some of the recommendations and acted on them, you would have done extremely well.
But I'm looking at last year. Sorry to interrupt you, but last year I made notes. I made notes every year, by the way, Ozzie. But, I mean, think of how much you've moved. I mean, you can go out into the Vancouver area in the Surrey condos, up, 60%. But you also talked about Seattle, which is, you've done that, I know, for a couple of years, but that's been a huge hit. Phoenix, you told us about in 2011, right? You know, sort of as the subprime mortgage crisis was taking a beating there. You know, you got into Phoenix, but last year I looked at Coquitlam, Surrey, some of the Burnaby stuff you said. Yeah, it's really had a great track record. I mean, you've got, I know, a lot of speakers, tons of people attend, but yeah, I want to pat you on the back for that, because in this business, that's the name of the game.
Yeah, and it's a confusing world. You know, we've had huge inflation. What's going to happen? What's QE? What's QT? All of those kind of stuff to make us make intelligent decisions. And the same speaker in 2016 that told us to go into Surrey, and the building that he recommended us is the builder Sharan City. That building is up 50%, and he's going to be speaking again. So it's going to be exciting. Can't miss it if you're interested in real estate.
Yeah, great stuff. That's April 7th, so you're talking a couple of weeks still, but just go to landrushcanada.com, landrushcanada.com. I said, Ozzie, a moment ago, and I don't want to take too long, but I said a moment ago that you've been traveling around, but I remember you telling me a story going back a bit where when you did that when you were younger too, and that you lived in Sydney, I think it was, and I've been, you know, Sydney about 2 years ago, and I was watching their kind of real estate market look very much like Vancouver, at least Toronto did for a year or two until Kathleen Wynne decided to crush the industry. But you lived in Sydney a while ago, and I was going to ask you about that because you had to live somewhere when you were there.
Yeah, we lived in which was actually a fairly old house in a place called King's Cross, and that was honored as astounding £19,000. Actually, that actually got me thinking about real estate when I was very, very young. Well, that same street, that same property, or right next door to it because it's gone, and it's now a sort of what I would call a very small 1,100 square foot townhouse, is now just under $2 million. And that's the thing on travel. You know, when you and I talked in 2014 about London, when we were there, and we were the negative news about London, and yet London was soaring, and Ireland was soaring, and last year we were in Russia, and in Russia the prices are going up in Finland. And hey, in Sydney, in East Melbourne, since the last 10 years, it went from 1.6 million to 4.1 million. In Jurock, from 2.1 to 4.8. I mean, it isn't just Vancouver. The world in its major cities is aflame from Hobart, Tasmania to all throughout New Zealand. And that's what I got to understand. We have a crazy world out there, not limited just to Vancouver.
And again, is everyone talk the same way they do in Canada, especially out in the West Coast, about foreign buyers?
No question about it. In fact, the debate on what kind of taxation should in, like Hong Kong, had for years a taxation that if you bought a property as an expat, like a foreigner, you would have a tax. If you sold the next year, you had a 50% tax. The year after that, 40%, and so on. And it's only after you kept it for 6 years, then you weren't having any tax. That would be, by the way, a true speculation tax, because after 6 years, the idea is you're no longer speculating. But rather than what we have now in BC, which is a wealth tax, it's just simply a grab, and they're trying to shift money from one person to another. But the interesting thing is that throughout Australia, the chief economist said that in our biggest capital city, the very high prices are now being achieved quite far from the center. In Melbourne and Sydney, $1 million suburbs are now some distance out, and it's continuing. And so when we look at Surrey exploding literally, I mean, condo prices on balance up 40%, and in central Surrey 60% in a year. That's what's happening here too. We are becoming so expensive in town. We're now heading into the Fraser Valley.
You know, it's one of the simplest things, I think, in real estate, or straightforward concepts, is that I always thought if you drop a stone and you watch the ripples, that's kind of like what it is. So you drop the stone in downtown Vancouver or Vancouver proper, it was bound to then spread out to the suburbs. And then the really fun part is how far do it go? Because it's certainly, I think, a lot of this is why I think, again, that speculation tax misses the point in some ways, a lot of ways, actually, the one they've applied here in British Columbia. But you know, there's a ton of people in Vancouver. We're always going to go to Victoria, Nanaimo, Kelowna, Penticton. It was going to spread out, as you've just described, happen again when you look at Melbourne, you look at Sydney, you look at the suburbs and how far that spreads out. You've seen it in the States with Seattle, how far those spread out. You know, so it's a phenomena that it's very interesting for investors to appreciate, because it's pretty easy to think, okay, this is where the action is. It's going to keep spreading out for affordability reasons. But it's interesting to hear from you that this is the kind of thing you're seeing throughout the world.
Well, that's the key, Mike. I mean, you go to a place like Hobart, Tasmania, you think in your mind small island somewhere. Well, the median home price now is $825,000. A medium condo is $536,000. The average price much higher than that. New Zealand is up between 7 and 18%. And so you look at some of these and you say, my goodness, what's happening? And that brings it back to what I always maintain, is that we live in the world's most unreported inflation of all time. That is inflation in hard assets, which you've been arguing for the last 10 or 15 years, is that, you know, you've got to save yourself. You have to be in hard assets. And we just maintain that inflation is all the same. And we have headline and core and all this nonsense. Any housewife knows that nothing is going up at the rate of only 2% on anything that she buys, or any payment that we make, or whether it's buying a passport or paying for parking. It's not up only 2%. We have a cost price inflation of some magnitude. And it's funny, you quoted Mr. Friedman, of course, Milton Friedman, who I've been quoting for 15 years, that inflation is primarily a monetary phenomenon. And we have the mother of all monetary phenomena for the last 10 years, and guess what? It settles down in hard assets.
We've only got about 10 seconds left. You got a quick hot property for me?
We got one in Maui, lowest priced, 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom unit. I know we never recommend Hawaii, but this is really cheap, $405,000, right on the beach in Kahana.
Just go to Jurock.com, click on the hot property button, and also go to LandrushCanada.com for tickets. April 7th, 12 speakers. There'll be hundreds of people there, but you can build on what they've been doing the last several years. Ozzie, nice to chat with you. Chat with you next week.